Hello everyone and happy Thursday, because of course new episodes of the Track Taxi come out on the channel every single Thursday. And this week's episode is probably going to be one of my favorites, at least on paper. In last week's episode we threw on the new Track Ready wheel and tire package. It's super aggressive. You can see the 245 wide front track day tire on the front of the Prius. It looks super aggressive. However, it's also highlighted the fact that this thing, one, definitely needs some more negative camber, and two, definitely has to lose the 4x4 ride height. So in today's episode, it's finally time to start playing with the suspension on my cheap Toyota Prius Taxi track car. Unlike other aspects of modifying a Toyota Prius, especially for track day duty, suspension is one of the key areas where there are actually a lot of choices, which is really exciting for the first time this entire build. Unfortunately, most of those choices tend to be very street-oriented because, of course, no one is taking a Toyota Prius to the racetrack. So you can actually go to the Toyota dealership and buy TRD lowering springs and a TRD rear sway bar, which is awesome. However, they are quite expensive and perhaps not quite as stiff or performance oriented as I'm looking for a track day build. Naturally, the other option is to go with adjustable coilovers, and that's exactly what I've done down here. Now, this may come as a slight surprise to regular viewers of this channel, especially despite my experiences with this brand, but I decided to go with a set of Godspeed adjustable coilovers. This is their Mono SS coilover system, kind of their one step above the totally basic option. It has a front camber plate, adjustable ride height and spring preload, and adjustable damping. Now, there are several adjustable coilover options on the market, like BC Racing, things like that. However, when push comes to shove and you actually call these brands, again, they're almost all special order. BC said they could get me their BR series coilovers, but it would take about a month for them to manufacture just because they are special order. Godspeed, which is local to me in Southern California, actually had these in stock, so I was able to go there and pick these up in person, which was very helpful for my tight timeline. Now, choosing the Godspeeds came from a variety of reasons. As I mentioned, I did call BC Racing. They're a very popular choice for aftermarket coilovers. Unfortunately, their Prius coilover does not have the option to change the supplied spring rates, which is a bit of a downer for my particular application. And also, they do not include a camber plate for whatever reason, which is, again, crucial for what I'm trying to do as far as tire wear and track day performance. Then there was a question of the spring rates themselves, like I mentioned. Out of the box, the Godspeeds do have some of the stiffer spring rates available for the Prius platform. They are quite soft in general. A 6K front spring and an 8K rear spring. Now, I'm not very good at metric on the fly. I'll include the Americanized numbers right here, but I think that's like a 350-pound front spring and like a 450-pound rear spring. Again, much stiffer than what's available for other options and should be much better for tire wear and flatter cornering on the racetrack. With all that out of the way, all the disclosures done, let's get to installing these.
For the sake of brevity, I've gone ahead and knocked out the passenger front side already, so I kind of have an idea of what to expect over here. Fortunately, the Prius front suspension design is very similar to that on my Project Civic SI, right behind the camera. So, while there are a few Toyota-isms, nothing is too scary, fortunately. First things first, to remove the front struts out of the Prius, you need to unhook the ABS line from the strut and then unbolt it from the knuckle as well. After that, you can remove the 17mm nut on the front sway bar end links and hammer the end link out of the strut assembly. After that is the hardest part of the entire job, and that is removing the two nuts and bolts that hold the strut to the knuckle. The torque spec on these is 180 pound-foot, which is a ton. So get your breaker bar out and get a pipe extension and go hard on these guys. After that, all you have to do is remove the 3 strut top nuts that hold the strut to the strut tower, and then carefully, more carefully than I did, massage the strut assembly out of the fender well. Anyway, with the new Godspeed coilover, I mentioned this when I reviewed Godspeed coilovers on the HN Civic. These camber plates that Godspeed uses, they're very cheap. They kind of, you find that on all the Chinese, Taiwanese coilovers. Out of the box, they're not set up for maximum negative camber, which I definitely need, 1, to clear my tire package, and 2, for tire wear.
So if you take this top plate off, there are holes drilled into this top mount. Just shift the plate over until the base of the shock bottoms out against the plate and crank it down like this. That's how you get maximum negative camber. Coils on, coils off.
So with the front suspension installed, it's time to hop into the rear, and unfortunately I don't get to practice doing one side before filming this because the Prius uses a simple beam axle rear suspension. So basically, when you lower the rear suspension, the whole thing comes down as one assembly. Swapping out the Prius rear suspension is about as simple as it gets. Use your 17mm wrench or 17mm socket and remove the bolt that holds the shock to the hub assembly. Use a 17mm wrench and a 5mm Allen key and basically loosen that nut, and that will drop the shock. From there, go back to the suspension and give the hub or brake caliper a good kick, and that'll loosen up your spring and pop that right out as well. And obviously installing the coilovers is basically the same thing in reverse, but with a few tricks, as you'll see. Installing the rear coilovers is pretty simple on the Prius, though obviously adjusting the preload on the spring and divided shock setup takes a bit of trial and error as well as setting the ride height. The one tip I want to include for the 4 people watching this who actually own Prii is that in order to fit the Godspeed rear shocks, you do have to cannibalize your OEM dust boot. There's a rubber isolator that sits in this little gap, and you need to put that on the new shocks, otherwise they will not install properly. Pro tip. And the Prius is back on the ground, now sitting about 2 inches lower on all 4 corners. I think it looks so much better. Take a look at this. Now, ride height is about 25.5 inches from top of the fender to the pavement at all 4 corners. I think the rear of the car is maybe a 1/16 higher for a teeny bit of rake. Obviously, I can go a lot lower in the back because this fitment is pretty conservative. I have just over exactly a 2-finger gap, which I think is pretty good for functional. The front is also about a 2-finger gap, but obviously it's a much more aggressive wheel and tire package. I gave the front fenders a little bit of a roll, so hopefully we clear there. I'll have to go drive it to make sure, but it looks like it should work. You can see it's close, but it should work. Now I need to try and align the Prius. Because it is a beam axle, I'm not sure how much adjustment, if any, there is in the rear suspension, but the front, I should be able to at least set the toe and get it driving straight. So let's get going. Like I mentioned, the rear suspension on the Prius doesn't really have any factory adjustment in it. They're like aftermarket parts you can use to try and like add camber or toe to it. But I've been told they're not super good for this later 3rd gen with your disc brakes. The hub design is slightly different, so they don't really work that well on this particular car. That said, I decided to throw the toe plates on and kind of just see at least what the toe is on the rear of the car. It doesn't appear to have any visual camber because of course it's a beam axle. Toe is basically 0, which is totally fine with this application. Just good to know that. So hopefully the rear should drive dead straight. Let's check the front.
All right, y'all, so I ended up breaking down and actually taking the Prius to an alignment shop, and that's because I ran into a slight issue, which is not entirely uncommon, is that the tie rod nuts were completely seized on. I'm assuming this car's never been aligned ever since it was purchased brand new like 8 years ago, so it's kind of to be expected. Unfortunately, usually you can get a cheater bar on your wrench, kind of just break it loose or hit it with a torch. But on jack stands, I couldn't get the car high enough to get a cheater bar under the car, and I couldn't find my torch. So to the alignment shop I went. I ended up finding a really cool place called Monrovia Alignment. I'll link their Instagram right here. Super cool guys. They're very familiar with lowered and modified cars. When I called them, they kind of understood the deal, what I was after, and turns out their lead alignment guy, he's a track day guy. He knew exactly what I was trying to do with this car. He really appreciated what I was trying to do here, and so he helped me out. We got the car on the alignment rack, and a few problems presented themselves. He's able to get the tie rods up front sorted out, which is great. However, this car appears to have a cross caster issue. So the driver front has about 7.5 degrees of caster. The passenger front has about 6.5 degrees of caster. Now we suspect there's a possible slight bend in one of the control arms, maybe just dead bushings causing that. But something to look into in the future. It's not terrible, but it's just a slight inconvenience because it means the car does ultimately want to pull very slightly to the right when push comes to shove. Then there's the issue of the rear suspension. Like I mentioned, there's not really any factory adjustment at all, and so when you lower the car, it obviously goes out of spec. Now, interestingly, the left rear was still in spec, if only just, but the right rear was way out. They recommended getting shims, which you stack behind the hubs on a beam axle car, and it kind of adjusts things. That's something to look forward to in the future, I guess, more playing around with the suspension. But in the meantime, I got the car driving straight. Alignment is, like I mentioned, average 7 degrees of caster up front, which is pretty good. Negative 3 degrees of camber up front, and about negative 1.3 in the back, which is more than I was expecting. Not bad. And now I want to go do a quick test drive, see how these Godspeeds feel. And I'm bringing that up because, well, one, I put coilovers in the car and big sticky tires, so I'm just genuinely interested. And two, longtime viewers of the channel will know that my previous experience with Godspeed shocks have not been the best. Project Civic Si is on the more expensive Godspeed, what the hell are they even called? Monomax dampers, and while they're fine on the street, a little bit bouncy, a little bit bumpy on the racetrack, they just cannot hang at all, and it's been a bit disappointing. These are the Mono SS, a lower grade of shock, and so I'm kind of curious, like, how do they ride? You know, I drove to the alignment shop and it seemed okay, but now I'm going to go to Angeles Crest, you know, my backyard, one of my favorite places in Los Angeles, and kind of chuck the car around and see how it really feels with this new setup. I mean, in theory, stiffer suspension, lowered ride, big sticky tires, it should be pretty fun up here. So, let's see how it goes. Well, that was quick. I had to pull over on one of the first turns to the crest. When I put the shocks in the car, I set them to full soft and then turned them up 7 clicks from there, and it's just way too hoppy and bouncy, just like the Monomaxes were on the Civic. So I had them dialed down to 5 clicks from full soft up front and 4 clicks from full soft out back. Hopefully that makes the car feel a little bit less nervous, because actually it's interesting, the traction control light is constantly flickering because the car is stiffer and kind of hopping. And so the car doesn't know what to do, and obviously when the traction control on the Prius, like I mentioned before at the track, is very invasive and very annoying. So hopefully kind of turning the shocks down and kind of relaxing the ride, make it feel a little bit better. Let's get back out there and find out. You can smell the brakes. Now this is an interesting change of pace. I've actually caught traffic in the Prius. It actually does feel pretty good in the corners up here. You know, I'm a huge proponent of, you know, bolting on tire grip being one of the best things you can do to a car. And I mean, this thing feels pretty good. With the Godspeed shocks backed off, it's much less hoppy. You know, it's not ideal. These are obviously not the best quality shocks, but it does feel much better. And with the stiffer spring rates, I mean, there's just less roll. And when you couple less roll, or more roll resistance, I should say, with stickier tires, it makes this more pleasant. Unfortunately, the traction control is still stepping in quite aggressively because, you know, when the car is stiffer, anytime it hits those bumps, it confuses the traction control and the car thinks you're going to crash. I might have to pull over and pull the fuse again because, you know, it did show that one issue like I did at the track where occasionally it just grabs the brakes and kind of throws you for a loop, which can make the car feel a bit unpredictable. Now, unfortunately, I'm not fast enough to keep up with the bikes in the Prius, but this is actually much better. I'm really surprised by this. Oh, there's the traction control. That's not me. Oh my God, I'm not braking. That was, wow, that's the traction control again. That wasn't me doing anything. The car just grabbed that left front tire and just dragged it. Definitely have to pull over and pull the ABS fuse. I mean, that's dangerous. The car just dragged me straight. It almost took me out of my lane. I'm not pushing that hard yet. Let me pull over because the car feels good, but the traction control, wow, that's really aggressive and definitely not even safe. Wow. All right, ABS fuse is pulled. My dashboard is lit up like a Christmas tree. Let's go driving. All right, now the safety stuff's not constantly intervening around every single corner, I can finally thrash this thing around a little bit. And Honestly, so far, I'm pretty impressed. With these Godspeed dampers, when you really back them off to these lower settings, the car feels pretty good. That's one of the perks of dealing with a car that is not that powerful nor all that heavy. It doesn't seem to work the suspension quite as hard. Now granted, the Prius isn't a featherlight. I think it weighs just under 3,000 pounds. But when you contend with the fact that I have a 245 tire up front and this thing probably makes like 100 horsepower, you know, it means the suspension doesn't have to work necessarily quite as hard to make things work. Now, I know the Mono SS dampers on this car are different than the Mono Max shocks on Project Civic Si, but at first when you crank them up, they do feel very similar, which is to say, bad. It's just a lot of bounciness and a very big lack of wheel control. But at least with these Mono SS dampers, I mean, on Angeli's Crest, which is for a mountain road slightly smoother, it does feel pretty good. I don't think I'd want to turn the shocks up any further than really where I have them. Like I said, 5 clicks from full soft up front and 4 clicks from full soft out back. Streets of Willow, the track I've been benchmarking, is pretty bumpy as well, kind of like this mountain road. So I really don't think there's any virtue in going any higher up on the shocks, because it just seems like you get a lot of just this, which apparently is a Godspeed hallmark trait. Of course, we're gonna find out about that very soon, because don't worry, more track time is fast approaching with the Prius now that it's been lightly modified. So, something to look forward to there. And now that I'm stuck behind slow traffic, this is a perfect way to do the outro. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. I hope you stuck around to the ending. I'm really pleased with how the Prius is turning out. This is proving to be a pretty fun little build. And stay tuned for the next episode of the Track Taxi, where I go do more dumb things with my cheap Prius taxi and have a lot of fun along the way. Thanks for watching. See you guys next time. Bye.